How could one of Hollywood's golden boys live a double life so wild, it left even insiders stunned. Van Johnson wasn't just a matinee idol, he was America's clean-cut heartthrob. But behind that charming smile and boy-next-door image was a secret life so scandalous, it's hard to believe it stayed hidden for decades. Rumors swirled that he was sleeping with 8 different actors a night, a claim dismissed by some, but whispered about endlessly in studio backlots and private dressing rooms. Born Charles Vannell Johnson in 1916, his childhood was far from glamorous. Abandoned by his mother and raised in a cold, emotionally distant home, Van found refuge in the dream world of show business. He clawed his way from dimly lit vaudeville stages to New York's bustling theater scene, catching the eye of Broadway producers with his magnetic presence and musical flair. But it was Hollywood that turned him into a star, and forced him into a life of secrecy, survival, and seduction. Today, we pull back the curtain on the man behind the legend, and the secret that rocked the golden age. Van Johnson's big break came in the early 1940s when he signed with MGM, the powerhouse studio that would shape both his career and his image. Instantly, he was cast as the affable, all-American boy next door, clean-cut, charming, and endlessly likable. It was a role that fit perfectly with the national mood. As World War II raged on and America's top leading men went off to serve, Van became the face that filled the void. While others wore uniforms on the battlefield, Johnson wore them on screen, embodying the ideal American soldier in film after film. But behind his rapid rise was a twist of fate. In 1943, a devastating car accident nearly ended his life. He survived, but only after doctors implanted a metal plate in his skull, leaving him medically unfit for military service. That accident would keep him stateside, and ironically, it catapulted him to stardom. MGM wasted no time turning him into a symbol of wartime resilience, casting him in patriotic box office hits like A Guy Named Joe, 1943, The Human Comedy, 1943, and 30 Seconds Over Tokyo, 1944. To the public, he was the wholesome hero America needed, but off-screen, his life was far more complicated. These films didn't just elevate Van Johnson's career, they made him a symbol of comfort and strength during one of the most turbulent times in American history. As soldiers fought overseas, audiences at home clung to familiar faces like Johnson's. He wasn't just a leading man, he was a presence that reassured, uplifted, and inspired. But unlike many wartime stars who faded with peace, Johnson proved he was more than a patriotic placeholder. In the years that followed, Van showcased a surprising depth and range that silenced his critics. In The Caine Mutiny, 1954, he delivered a powerful, emotionally layered performance as Lieutenant Steve Merrick, holding his own opposite the legendary Humphrey Bogart. It was a role that shattered the illusion that Johnson was only suited for light-hearted fare. Critics praised the film, and Johnson's gravitas, in what many still consider his finest dramatic performance. But his talent didn't stop there. He moved effortlessly across genres, shining in musicals like Brigadoon, 1954, alongside Gene Kelly, stepping into suspense-filled mysteries, and later transitioning to the small screen with ease. Whether it was romance, drama, or thrillers, Van Johnson brought a consistency and charisma that made him one of Hollywood's most quietly enduring stars. His singing skills stood out the most. Besides singing and dancing, he could also play a lot of different instruments. Van Johnson was a successful actor, but he was also admired for how well he looked in public and how easy he was to talk to. He was often called the Bobby Soxer's hero, which refers to how many teenage girls loved him when he was at his best. Because he looked good and was friendly off-screen, he was one of the most bankable and trusted stars of his time. He was very famous not only in the US but also around the world. He became a cultural icon of hope, honesty, and youthful exuberance after the war. At the time, he got as much fan mail as famous people like Frank Sinatra and Clark Gable. This shows how emotionally connected he was with his fans. Van Johnson moved smoothly into stage and TV parts in his later years, continuing to charm new generations of fans. He played parts in plays like Lajo and The Music Man, and he was a guest star on TV shows like Murder, She Wrote, and The Love Boat. Despite being in his senior years, he kept working in show business because he loved making people laugh. Even though the studio system that started Johnson's career was no longer around, he was still a recognized figure. He is often remembered for being kind and gentle, and for making millions of people feel better during some of America's worst times. Van Johnson, a clean-cut and friendly leading man in Hollywood in the 1940s and 1950s, married Eve Abbott, a former stage actor, on January 25, 1947. And they got married just one day after she publicly ended her marriage to actor Keenan Wynn. Their marriage happened very quickly, which made a lot of people wonder why, since all three of their relationships were very close. Eve is a poised and sophisticated woman who has worked in theater before. She was married to Wynn, a charismatic and well-known character actress who is the son of the famous comedian Ed Wynn. The situation was difficult from the start, not only because of the quick change from one marriage to another, but also because the three people involved were very close to each other. Van and Eve's only biological child together was born soon after they got married in 1948. Her name is Skylar Johnson. With this marriage, Van also became a dad to Eve's two sons from her first marriage. Edgar Keenan. Among them were Ned Wynn, who went on to become an author and actor, and Tracy Keenan Wynn, who became a famous screenwriter. At first glance, the blended family looked like a typical Hollywood family. But things were much more complicated behind the scenes. Years later, in an honest and revealing posthumous comment, Eve Abbott said that her marriage to Van wasn't based on love, but on an arrangement set up by powerful people in the Hollywood studio system. Eve said that the union was set up by executives at Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer, MGM, especially under the direction of Louis B. Mayer, to stop rumors about Van Johnson's sexuality. In 1940s Hollywood, where people cared a lot about how they looked, being called gay could ruin an actor's career. Eve said that they needed their big star to be married to stop rumors about how he acts around women. I was the only woman he would marry, which was sad. Her words emphasized how awful things were at the time, when people often gave up their own identities to be more marketable and fit in with society's views. All of the main characters still had feelings for each other, which made the love triangle, or quadrangle, as some might call it, even more confusing. Edwin, the old head of the Wynn family, used to say that their relationships were so complicated that he felt sorry for them. I can't tell them apart. Evie liked Keenan a lot. Keenan really likes Evie. Van really likes Evie. Van is special to Evie. Van cares about Keenan. Van is important to Keenan. His comment, which was both funny and sad, gave away a clue to a deeper, more emotional story. A story about love, duty, doubt, and maybe even love that isn't acknowledged or pushed down between the three of them. Louis B. Mayer, who ran the studio, was a fierce protector of MGM stars and their identities. He was known to go to great lengths to find and stop any scandal. Mayer didn't just see the studio's actors and actresses as entertainment, he saw them as investments that needed to have their image constantly maintained. He was said to have been very controlling of the private lives of stars, including Johnson, who he thought were gay. This culture of fear and control put even more pressure on people like Johnson to follow heteronormative standards, even if those standards were not in line with their own truths. Johnson carefully cultivated an image as the happy boy next door, but the more disturbed truth was always very different from what people saw. Eve and Johnson were married during the height of Johnson's Hollywood success and Mayer's rule at MGM. However, after Mayer's death in 1957, the marriage slowly fell apart. Johnson is said to have started dating a young male dancer in a London West End production of The Music Man, where he played the famous Professor Harold Hill. Soon after, Ned Wynn, Eve's son, said that Johnson had left his wife and kids for this dancer. He left her for a guy, more like a boy. He's the lead boy dancer, Ned said in an interview, giving a rare look into the marital problems and shifting relationships that led to the end of the marriage. The couple officially split up in 1961, and after a few years of being apart and going through the court process, they got a divorce in 1968. People said that Johnson struggled with inner problems that came from his childhood, in addition to the stresses of fame and public image. Eve said that when they were not together, his personality was very different from the happy, positive roles he often played on screen. She said that he was sad and moody, that he had a hard childhood, and that he often shut down emotionally. People say that Johnson would go to his bedroom and be alone when he was in a fight or a bad situation instead of getting involved. His fear of conflict and weak emotions showed that he was a highly private and hurt person who had been through a lot of personal, professional, and social pressures over the course of his life. Johnson also had a rough connection with his father, which made him emotionally distant. This tough father-son relationship left a mark on him that lasted well into adulthood. Sadly, Van Johnson was said to have been separated from his daughter Skylar at the time of his death in 2008. This shows how hard his complicated and often painful life was on him personally. A life that was full of secrets, hardships, and a deep feeling of being emotionally alone, as well as movie stardom. In the closed-off and image-obsessed world of Hollywood in the middle of the 20th century, few secrets were kept more closely than the private lives of its stars, especially when they were at odds with the public images that the studio created for them. One of these stars was Van Johnson, the all-American golden boy with red hair, freckles, and a good smile. Behind the well-groomed image of the friendly starring man who wowed audiences in movies like 30 Seconds Over Tokyo and The Caine Mutiny, there was a secret life that not many people outside of the industry were willing to talk about at the time. Insiders have said for a long time and sometimes in whispers that Johnson had sexual and romantic relationships with several other male stars, sometimes very quickly after each other, which was against the rules of the time. Some reports say that Johnson's desire for male company was not only very strong, but also very large. It was said that he slept with 8 stars in one night. This amazing claim is shocking, but it makes sense when you look at it in context. When Van Johnson became famous, the studio system was in full swing. During this time, Louis B. Mayer was in charge of MGM and had complete power over the public and private lives of its contract players. Being gay was frowned upon and could ruin a star's career. Stars who didn't conform to heteronormative norms ran the risk of being blacklisted or even worse. To keep up appearances, studios set up lavender marriages, which were relationships between gay or bisexual actors and partners of the opposite sex, who were usually other actors who needed the same cover. Many people later thought that Johnson's marriage to Eve Abbott, who used to be married to fellow actor Keenan Wynn, was kind of like this. Eve said in public after Johnson's death that MGM pushed them to get married and that Johnson was gay, which backed up the long-running rumors. People who were involved in Hollywood's underworld in the 1940s and 1950s have told stories, some of which are more whispered myths than true events, about fancy private parties that took place in Beverly Hills homes, Laurel Canyon estates, or on the lots of studios after hours. When these events took place away from the paparazzi and press agents, many Hollywood stars who were hiding their identities were able to be themselves for a short time. Johnson, by means of several such bills, was an everyday attendee and a rather sought-after determined. Rumors link him romantically or sexually with several prominent and lesser recognized male actors of the time, which includes Rhodey McDowall, Richard Simmons, now not the health guru, however a 1940s actor of the same call, Farley Granger, and even Howard Keel. Whether these connections had been long-term flings or fleeting encounters is tough to decide. However, more than one biographers and historians have blanketed such testimonies in retrospectives about queer Hollywood records. One precise anecdote surpassed around with the aid of those who knew the inner workings of Hollywood's underbelly claimed that Johnson once boasted to a close confidant approximately hosting a marathon night with a string of fans one after the opposite. They all male actors working below the MGM, Warner Brothers, or Fox umbrellas. The quantity cited became 8, a superb and provocative declare that has circulated amongst vintage Hollywood gossip circles for decades. Names whispered in connection with that night encompass Clifton Webb, Anthony Perkins, and even a younger Rock Hudson, although Hudson himself was famously private and closeted for a whole lot of his early career. Whether the variety is correct, exaggerated, or totally mythical, what subjects maximum is what the story displays. A hidden network of gay and bisexual guys in Hollywood who navigated an oppressive gadget with secrecy, code, and frequently desperation. Johnson, along with his boyish attraction and seemingly conservative photograph, embodied the duality that many such actors needed to maintain to live to tell the tale in show enterprise. The stark evaluation between his public character and personal identity have become a symbol of the double lives so many stars have been forced to live. In hindsight, Johnson's rumored escapades, whether 8 actors in a single night or a handful over a week, serve now not to scandalize, but to humanize. They replicate a person who, like many others, yearned for connection and authenticity in a global that demanded silence and compliance. Those testimonies, whispered through the long time, are now not just titillating gossip. They are a part of a richer, extra-sincere understanding of Hollywood's mystery history and the price its stars paid to entertain the world whilst hiding their real selves. Van Johnson regularly stepped far away from the public spotlight and formally retired from appearing in the early 1990s following a long and prolific career that had spanned nearly 5 many years. Called one in every of MGM's maximum famous and bankable stars all through the 1940s and 1950s, Johnson had transitioned into degree and TV roles at some stage in his later years. But, by using the 1990s, age and declining health led him to quietly withdraw from appearing altogether. After retiring, Johnson settled right into an extra-personal life in the Big Apple metropolis. He took up house in a penthouse apartment placed at 405 East 54th Street on Manhattan's East Facet. A prestigious cope with that pondered his as soon as lofty popularity in Hollywood. The building, a conventional post-war co-op, presented him perspectives of the East River and a quiet safe haven from the bustling metropolis below. For years, Johnson maintained a low profile, hardly ever making public appearances, even though he turned into regarded to nevertheless occasionally interact with buddies and admirers who diagnosed him. As he grew older and required additional care, Johnson ultimately moved out of his Long Island rental and relocated to Tappan's Manor, an assisted living facility located in the quaint and scenic town of Nyack, New York along the Hudson River. This facility provided the scientific attention and aid he needed in his later years while additionally supplying a non-violent surroundings where he ought to stay out his final bankruptcy with dignity. Nyack, acknowledged for its inventive network and serene ecosystem, became a fitting placing for a person whose existence had as soon as been full of the short pace of film units, degree productions, and red carpets. Van Johnson passed away at Tappan's Manor on December 12, 2008 at the age of 92. His demise marked the end of an technology for plenty enthusiasts of classic Hollywood cinema, as Johnson had embodied the clean-cut, all-American male best for the duration of the golden age of film. Regardless of the giant fame he as soon as enjoyed, his passing befell quietly far away from the fanfare and flashbulbs that had once observed him. Consistent with public facts and news reports, his stays have been cremated as according to both his own needs or those of his closest surviving family. Although he left no organic youngsters, his legacy lived on through his many movies, his committed enthusiasts, and his adopted daughter Skylar. Even in dying, Van Johnson remained an image of a bygone time in American cinema. Charming, polished, and perpetually remembered as the purple-haired heartthrob of Hollywood's golden generation.